7 years ago, what I was physically is not present here anymore. So, what's all this history about? Just diving into that opens actually really a very physical based inquiry into our spiritual nature.
Action!
Welcome to the Spirit of Yoga. We are Kirsten
and Burkhard
from the Akasha Yoga Academy. In today's podcast, we hop right into the topic of physical renewal, and we're here to share a bit from our own experience what worked and what didn't, what are problems of physical renewal and hacks for physical renewal. So we are here today. Burkhard, Mr. Anatomy, has a lot to share, I'm sure, about just the miracle of this body. The body seems so solid, but it isn't. Can you share a little bit about this idea that we have, this fixed idea that the body is something solid, but it isn't?
Yeah, so renewal, our topic today. Renewal, refreshing, resetting. We call it, I remember when we started our intense yoga journey in an intensive course there, it was announced yoga is great for regeneration, revitalization, and rejuvenation, even, which sounds like a big promise, a far stretch, but it's true. And this could be summarized by the headline renew. And as you are pointing to, the body is constantly renewing itself. So it is an ongoing process, which comes on this topic of input and output. So putting new ingredients in and putting old ingredients out. A related headline in anatomy physiology is metabolism.
Right.
You might have heard of that one.
Right.
So all the stuff which we put into our body, yes, which is the food, and it is the tea in our tea chat, the drinks, but not to underestimate, it is also the air. We
Right.
tend to forget about that one. And actually one of the biggest and most productive metabolic organs in the human body, surprisingly, is the skin. So there's, for example, a lot of pH balancing of the acid alkaline level in the body happening through the skin and through the breath. These are some intricate details which we are usually not aware of. We think of the intake of the food and drinks, but we tend to forget about these nuances. And we tend to ignore how marvelously dynamic and integrated the body is, how many processes are happening on an ongoing basis. I was just this weekend on Art of Living masterclass with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, famous Indian master. And he was reminding me of the fact, which I picked up already 2 decades ago, that the human body has around 30 trillion cells. So that is 30,000 million cells. And each of those cells is an alive organism. We might remember something from high school biology, how there is some mitochondria, some energy exchange happening, different parts in the cells. Then there's, of course, in the core of the cell, there's the DNA, which is constantly reproducing itself, the whole genetic code in each cell, in most cells, and so on. So it's super complex. Each cell is a complex microorganism in itself, amazingly intricate and stunning. So many processes, dozens, probably hundreds of processes happening in every cell every moment. And we have 3,000 million cells. It's like, how is it even possible to imagine? We cannot. And it's super alive. So new cells are produced, blood cells in the bone marrow and so on. But also cells are dying. I just looked it up before our recording and coincidentally came across the fun fact. Every second, 1 million cells are dying. Per second, 1 million cells. That's a lot per second. And then, of course, they're tiny small, but then there's waste products. Elimination happens. So the liver, the kidneys, and other organs are responsible then for eliminating such metabolic byproducts where the human body is constantly recreating itself, in this process also falling apart and regenerating itself inevitably, with yoga or without yoga. And in yoga and related regeneration practices, we create favorable conditions for the body to renew itself, to purify itself. And we will talk a lot about this in the spring clean, refresh, renewal approach, dieting, fasting. We will later on in this conversation look into topics how we can support the body in this renewal, regeneration, which is happening on an ongoing basis, inevitably. If we know about it or not, if we support it or sabotage it, the body keeps on rolling in that process.
But what I find spiritually most inspiring about it is that actually space is mostly what we are. There is matter, there is the different elements present in the body, but mostly what we are is space. And I find that very, very inspiring to loosen the grip of identification a little, that it's actually not as solid as it seems. And actually, even the solid part, you see how constantly the body is dying and renewing, down to the bones, right? Like
Down to the
basically
bones.
every cell in the body, every cell, and the bones are made of cells, everything is made of cells, is dying and renewing.
Exactly. That's a famous fun fact in popular science. Roughly speaking, the statement would be that after 7 years, no cell in the human body is the old one. Every cell got replaced, even in the bones. If it's exactly 7 years, might be debated, but just to understand the principle that not
Yeah.
even a bone is kind of like, static. We get born with it, it grows, and then it stays till the end of our life. No, but it's a living organism. It gets replaced and regenerated in that way. And you mentioned the space topic. Maybe before going into the nuance of that, just seeing also a famous fun fact that around 2/3 of the body is fluid.
Right.
It's not as solid as we think. Most of it
Yeah.
is actually just water fluid trapped in this tissue structure, in these cellular
Right.
membranes, in the fascia, and so on. So most of it is not as solid as it seems. It's actually just a fluidic mesh. And in addition to most of the body being actually water, we also saw that each of those 30 trillion cells has so many processes happening inside. We didn't even mention that in addition to those 30 trillion cells of the human body, we have more than 30 trillion, maybe 35, 38 trillion bacteria and microorganisms hosted in our human body. Yes, a lot in the gut, famous gut bacteria, probiotics, prebiotics, don't forget about prebiotics, and so on, yeah. But also, they are discovering more and more about the oral microbiome. Basically, any cavity of the human body has a whole microbiome going on in itself, and it's a harmonious balance between different types of microorganisms, hundreds, thousands of different species, and trillions of those bacteria, more than we have cells. So complex, so like also a synergy between those levels. And then you mentioned the spaciousness. There we zoom in one order of magnitude closer in the cell. Okay, in each cell there's these little organs, ingredients, processes happening. But what is the cell made of? It's made out of molecules and atoms. And when we zoom into those even further down into the nuanced detail, then it becomes very exciting again, because what we can proportionally remember again from high school physics biology is that the distance between the core of the atom, the proton and the neutron in the center, and those electrons circulating around, the distance between the electrons in the circle, in the spheres around, and the core is huge. It's gigantic. It's similar proportions to the solar system, where the sun, mostly empty space, and then a few tiny, tiny planets in the middle of nowhere floating around there. The proportions of that are also insane. It's like mostly space, obviously, our solar system. And the same is actually true for each atom, where it's, yes, the proton, neutron in the center core, but then it's basically nothing. It's just a shell being kept up with this electron magnetic charge thing. It's mostly empty space. Every atom is mostly, by far, like 99.x%, mostly empty space.
And this is what I find really fascinating.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
who are we then when we define ourselves so strongly through our physical body? So what is it that you are in the physical body? Like, is it the space, but is the space in the body different than the space outside of the body? So when it comes to bacteria, also the question is that part of what we consider us, or is that an outsider? And like, what are we then when we so strongly identify ourselves and define ourselves through our physicality? And most of what it is space, which is the same as what's surrounding us. And so many other guys living inside, there's a constant coming and going of the whole cells. Like 7 years ago, what I was physically is not present here anymore. So what's all this history about? Um, so what are we? So just diving into that opens actually really a very physical based inquiry into our spiritual nature. And what I recently really love contemplating is the fact of eating is a miracle. It's like such a miracle. I just take a banana, I eat a banana, and then it's me. It's a body. It's becoming part of what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. So am I the banana, or what how can that happen? Like just a dumb banana from the tree I take, and it becomes such an intelligent mechanism. And that's happening with each and every intake. And there actually I feel when that hits home, a big rethinking and reconsideration of what we put into what we consider us can kick off. And this is what we want to dive a little bit into today, because obviously dieting is a part of yoga as it creates supportive conditions for the practice, for the energy movement, for consciousness. And of course, we experimented with that, and we're here to share a little. And I'd like to just start with something that I very recently learned to appreciate a lot, coming actually through something that I'm already for a longer time looking into, is ways of resetting the body through cleanse. Cleanse through a dieting over a specific period of time to really help the body. And usually when the body is helped, also the mind is changing. The emotional state can change and benefit from that. So an emergency reset that works very well for me is actually to look into the nature of food and how it actually affects the body. And in tropical climate and in the age that I'm in, we are confronted with inflammation, and inflammation in the body is responsible for so many things going wrong. Inflammation generally is an important process of the body's healing capacity. Even if you build muscles, it comes through inflammation and the healing process of the body. So inflammation generally is nothing bad. Inflammation is a necessary, important part of the bodily process. But when that takes over and is the predominant state of the body, and the healing of that inflammation is not coming in, this is when many things physically go wrong. This is when not only physically things go wrong, also mental health depends on inflammation. So what I experimented with and found really, really helpful is to look into what is actually causing inflammation in the body, and what is healing basically inflammation. And in the olden days, or like 10-15 years back, I experimented quite a bit with acid alkaline diet. That's a dietary approach to we just touched upon the pH level of the body just a little earlier. The body has in its ideal condition a certain pH balance, a certain equilibrium in which it functions well. It can function also outside of this equilibrium, but not as well anymore. So the whole idea of the approach is to support the body in finding that very, very delicate equilibrium, and through diet, supporting to be there. But also what you just mentioned is very crucial too. It is not only intake through food, there is water as well intake, there is the skin, there is the lungs, there is the air. If we're moving in a highly polluted area, and that's just our daily life, like we are just by breathing, by the fact of breathing, setting our body in quite a stress situation to somehow maintain the pH level. So generally the body does everything to maintain this pH level. And what's really supportive for the body to come into its balance is to work with mineral salts, which are found in vegetables a lot. So that's a dieting approach, the pH balancing diet, but also an approach that I'm more recently looking into, the balancing through the medical medium diet, is basically both dietary approaches based on making vegetables the main food source, the main source of intake of food, vegetables, fruit as well, and different approaches to different degrees, but to really provide as much fresh food, as much vegetable and fruit-based food as possible, and to basically take away the foods that are triggering inflammation as a main food source, and have that more like as an occasional food source. And triggering sources seem to be, and in my experience, I can confirm that, seem to be grain-based foods, especially gluten. So gluten seemed, and in my experience, it is strongly triggering inflammation. Also, the observation of myself is that in younger age, it wasn't as much. I feel that's also something that comes more through aging. And at the same time, also climate has a huge impact. In cold climate, I'm not so much affected by that as I'm in tropical hot climate. So it's also really interesting to observe what's happening with the body in consideration of the environment. So taking away gluten makes for me quite a difference. Taking away sugars makes quite a difference. Taking away dairy and eggs make quite a difference. And what's left then is really a plant-based diet, basically. The biggest part of the diet being fruit and vegetable, supplemented, supported with nuts, with seeds, with covering basically what's needed as well to fulfill the spectrum of nutrients. What I want to say is that I find this type of cleansing approaches like hugely beneficial, but they are short-term approaches. So they are cleanses, they are 7-day cleanses, 10-day cleanses, and it's not a lifestyle to be applied for a long duration of time. I find that there's also quite some confusion that I see, that this cleansing approaches are tried to be used as a dietary lifestyle, and I feel this is where things can go easily wrong. That if we are really inspired by acid alkaline and put that as a continuous diet, we might run short in certain nutrients, because it's really meant for healing, cleansing, temporary reset. And that can be huge. The benefits can be so huge. Healing can be kicked off, or actually a whole healing process can be undergone with such cleansing approaches. But I want to say it's really important to see that a cleanse is temporary and not a approach for long term. So I'm quite a big fan of cleanses that nourish. I experimented a lot with cleanses that would just, go away from food intake altogether. But actually, over the years, I very much started seeing the benefit of a cleanse that is at the same time nourishing and not starving basically the system. I start now talking about fasting, and fasting can be applied in quite different ways. Fasting can be applied as a cleanse for a certain period of time, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days. I tried all of that, but also fasting can be integrated into the daily rhythm. And I feel there's quite a strong difference in effect when it comes to a long-term fasting and regularly daily committed fasting. So the idea of the long-term fasting is basically to trigger a healing process by starving, so to speak, the body from external nutrients and kicking off a process of recycling the inner environment basically as energy source. And through that, what will be first chosen by the body to basically recycle is what's not serving. And through that, basically, a cleanse is produced by recycling, reusing, eating up basically unfavorable conditions, growth in the body. That can be from stored fat tissues all the way to cancer tumors. So this is an interesting approach, but a very radical approach, which is quite a bit different when we take that into daily fasting cycle or fasting rhythm of daily food intake and being without food at all, which is the intermittent fasting. And I know that you have quite a bit of experience, especially lately. You're quite a big fan of intermittent fasting. What do you feel like? How does it work, and why does it work, and how does it feel?
Yeah, so generally the principle of fasting, as you described it, is giving a break, giving a
Mm,
pause for the body to not deal with new input, not having to cope with the processing of the new intake, and all the digestive metabolic processes related to converting these incoming nutrients, which is done obviously a lot on all stages of the digestive canal. Starts actually already in the mouth, esophagus, and then stomach, the acid, hydrochloric acid breaking down the rough parts, and then into the small intestine, some first absorption happening there, and then going to the liver. There's so many
mm,
biochemical processes
mm,
going on. It's like insanely complex, and modern science still only understands the surface of it. So we don't go deeper into a physiology anatomy lecture of the details of it, but what we can just intuitively understand, that it's quite a complex, massive task for our organism to deal with all this stuff coming in. And of course, it likes it, it needs it, it processes it, it lives on it, it uses those ingredients coming in to replace the old ones. That's what we talked about in the renewal so many cells dying, but also so many cells are being recreated. No?
Yeah.
1 million cells per second die, but also we stay alive for years and decades, so they are also being reborn. And it's a whole thing going on there, even during fasting, of course. It continues. But then shifting to taking the energy from the new food intake, shifting over to living on reserves.
Yeah.
So this is in the longer term fasting, 2-3 days upward. The body completely goes onto a different energy source and shifts around and lives on the reserves. And the liver and the organism can handle that surprisingly well, actually. And as we know from the longer term fast, even the feeling of hunger
Yeah.
disappears, and it's
Yeah.
not like kind of starving every like all day long craving. It's not. Experience
Yeah.
shows it's not. So that generally the principle that we give the body a break, not having to deal with all the new input, but on the one hand, more or less shifting to internal reserves, but also having more attention, energy, space, in quotation marks, to deal with maintenance tasks, to do some cleaning up, some purification, some release of old stuff, of dealing with all the stuff which we put into our body previously. So that's generally the mindset, and not just a fantasy. Just to understand, what's the general principle of it, and what am I doing if I stop eating for a while? What happens then, in a very general bird's eye perspective in the body, without understanding the details of it. But it's helpful to see the principle, understand that. And then the long term fasting, whatever, 2-3 days shift completely into living on reserves. But then you ask about the daily fasting, where we inevitably have some periods where we eat and other periods where we don't eat. There is a tendency that we spend in the modern society quite a lot of moments with snacking. It's a
Mm.
quite widespread phenomenon. This kind of always eating a little bit here and there, some snack there, and kind of it comes then in, of course, with the emotional, psychological aspects of kind of compensating for some stress and eating, stuffing ourselves with something, consumerism, pleasure, satisfaction via the senses, and all the stimuli and all the cravings related to that, and all the rest of the psychological mechanisms related to it. But inevitably, even if we are like on a snacking style lifestyle where we eat like so many snacks per day, still there will be some periods where we don't eat, and that's obviously at night when we're sleeping. Some people even in the middle of the night go to the fridge and kind of like top up a little bit to be on the safe side and satisfy some craving there. But usually we give at the nighttime more or less of a break, and then in the morning, what do? We break the fast. Break fast breakfast. The name even says it very clearly. And no, before that we had like a 5, 6, 8, 12 hour period where we did not eat, depending on our habits of eating. So many people inevitably have a like 5, 6, 12 hour fast per day anyhow happening.
Right.
So this is super important for the body in the nighttime to do some processing, some digesting, some of these metabolic processes, some maintenance, some purification, not only in the digestive system, but also for the nervous system, super duper important, sleep cycles and all the rest of that. So the body needs this regeneration period at night. And the idea of the intermittent fasting is to simply make that period a bit longer, or even a bit longer. Like give the body not only 6 hours of break, but give it 12 hours and see how it feels, how you do with that. And in the beginning, it might be a bit kind of like, oh yeah, but I need my snack before nighttime or something. How else will I get through the night? I don't have energy. You'll be fine. So this is also an early dinner, and then no late night snack. You'll not be starving, and you still got enough calories, and it's like you still wake up actually better because the sleep at night is experientially lighter, better, and in some ways more restorative
Mm.
if we go to bed on a more or less empty stomach. So that was for a long time also debated and contested, but more and more scientific evidence also points to exactly that, that having a massive big meal directly before going to bed is not a good idea from a metabolic processing and regeneration period for the
Mm.
night. So That's more or less experiential also. We don't need scientific proof for that. It just feels kind of heavy. And the yogis opposite, they like the lightness. So to have a lucid dream, we need to be very light and subtle at night, and not like this heavy, like knockout, food coma type of at night. The yogis prefer this lightness. So that is also cultivated, for example, in many monasteries and many traditions. For example, the Buddhist context, it's common where we did many of these vipassana silent meditation retreats. It's common that the monks and nuns, they don't eat anything solid after 12 noon.
Right.
That's a pretty radical approach, but it's a kind of intermittent fasting, which has been established there for 2,500 years in the Buddhist traditions, and they didn't starve to death. They're just fine. Sometimes even the monks, they can be even quite weighty, because maybe then they eat too much and they stuff themselves in the two other meals, in the breakfast and lunch, too much. So you can easily get enough calories, or still eat too much, even if you just have 2 meals and stop eating at 12 noon. So that's fine, but there is a tendency that if we're a bit mindful, that we just generally eat also a bit less calories. It's an easy, straightforward way to reduce the calorie intake by just not eating so many meals and not throughout so many hours of the day. Because we just feel then after like a big breakfast, we just feel kind of full. And if we are not obsessed with stuffing and over binge eating and worrying too much how it will be in the afternoon at night, then we'll be fine. We notice a satience, a full belly feeling, and then in a natural way, without calorie counting, we can reduce the calorie intake, which for most of modern societies is helpful in itself, because usually people consume too many calories and then they try with some kind of dieting, calorie counting, restrictions, etc. But it gets quite limiting. What can I eat? And then the whole obsessions around that. So a simple way actually of reducing calories is just to have less meals. So that as a first take on the intermittent fasting. And then it's the question how long we stretch that. And also for some people, they prefer, to not skip breakfast because they need something in the morning to get started. For some typologies, it's better to really have breakfast pretty early. And they're fine with not having food in the afternoon, evening too much, eating lighter in the dinner, or stopping earlier to eat. For other people, they're by habit and maybe by typology easier with the skipping of breakfast, but they just maybe out of social reasons and habit, they prefer to not skip the dinner. It's the most important meal of the day for some people, culturally or habitually, subjectively, physically, who knows why. So experimenting also what works for you, trying it out, but restricting the whole duration of the eating per day to a smaller time window.
What is the recommended time frame for eating in order to have really benefits of it physically? Isn't it
so kind of it starts like anything. Most of the research and the experiential factors point to kind of, in a way, the shorter the better, more or less, with some cutoff periods, but like whatever works for you, and also easing into it. For example, the first thing which I, for example, started to do is I just try to skip the late night dinner snack or after dinner snack, like coming at home later in the evening, and then the classic checking in the fridge what type of nice treat dessert is there. And it's healthy treats. I would go for some whatever. For example, last night I came home late and I was still a bit hungry, so there was some pomelo grapefruit there, and I was eating some of that. And it's a light snack, and it's it's basically mostly water. And yes, it has a bit of sugar, but it has some vitamin. Whatever, it's a light thing. So at least choosing a light snack instead of a heavy snack, that would be a first step. And whatever, when it's ice cream, don't go for the commercial supermarket industrial chemical ice cream, but then have a lighter ice cream at the nighttime, a self-homemade with some fruits or something, something lighter like this. Or moving that late night snack a bit earlier, not having it after 10 or after 11 p.m. Like I'm not going to eat anything after that anymore. So moving that late night snack to a night snack, kind of cut off period.
Right.
Door close, fridge lock, kind of after 11 o'clock, after 10 o'clock, after 9 o'clock, no more snacks. And then if a snack, then something very light and healthy, and not and so on. So easing into this, stopping to eat earlier and earlier. and whatever works for you, and not being too radical and strict, because then is the danger, like, yeah, I did for 1 week, I didn't eat anything after sunset, 6 o'clock, and then 1 week later we're back kind of to midnight snacks. So more important that it's sustainable, that it kind of easing oneself into that, stopping to eat earlier, and whatever works there. Finishing at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, a lighter dinner, even not only when, but also what I eat. So that's for the evening. Should have started maybe in the morning. Just breaking the fast later, having the breakfast later. And of course, it can be difficult with rhythm, whatever, going to work early in the morning, and I need to eat something because I don't want to eat in the subway or in the bus car commuting to work. And then at work, it's kind of, there's no breakfast break till 10 o'clock, and I just feel super hollow stomach. I need some energy and so on. So I need to time it, of course, according to life circumstances. But see how one can possibly delay the breakfast a bit.
And what's the ideal? Is it 50-50, like 50% of the day I eat, 50 not?
Again,
Or
easing
I
into
think
it. So
what I
starting with,
hear is that the non-eating part is bigger than the eating part. And what's the benefits exactly?
so again, there's no fixed numbers, and there's
Yeah.
no clear kind of cut-off period that if it's more than 12 hours, more than 14 hours, then there's no experiments, trials, scientific research, which no, puts different, they call it actually a feeding windows, a time restricted feeding, because it's a lot
Uh-huh.
done in animal studies. So then they try it out with mice, and when they give them food and so on. So there's some famous experiments in that context, where they tried, one of the archetype experiments in the context is with the mice, where they were um, on the one hand choosing a special diet of no special ingredients, very beneficial and so on, and not trying to reduce whatever the protein, the fats, the carbohydrates and so on. So they experimented with different mixtures of the food, and then they experimented with just the feeding time, the duration, the feeding window, they call it. And for those mice where they limited the feeding window down to a shorter period, for mice it's of course also only partially comparable because of their different organism, but no, reducing it to like 2, 4, 6 hours per day only feeding window, then no, like no restriction on quantity, and no matter kind of what they were eating, still they had health benefits, just by reducing the duration of that feeding period, that time window. So that is one of the archetype studies where they try to draw conclusions. It doesn't even matter so much what you eat, but it's surprisingly important when you eat it. That is, in a way, the main message of the research. And yes, it is debated. Yes, it is contested. And going to extremes, as some people are pushing it, no, only eating one meal per day, and then trying to overeat stuff, all the calories and all the nutrients in at once, can have other downsides and problems. And know how much protein can be absorbed per meal. There's research around that. It's better to spread it out a bit more evenly. So there's lots of debate, as always in the nutrition and dietary field. There's no clear certainty and full scientific proof for either this or that. So we need to take it with 3 pinches of salt and not be too obsessed with, like, this study says, and because of this, it's like this. There's hundreds, no, there's thousands of studies. Many of them are contradicting each other. But there's something, what is definitely more or less agreed upon, is that eating for less hours per day, reducing that feeding window time frame, tends to automatically reduce the calories. And reducing the calorie intake for most people and typologies is a beneficial thing in itself. And it's a comparatively easy way, because I don't need to count calories, and I don't need to worry so much what I eat. I just skip breakfast or I skip dinner type of, and then it's done, and so on. And then I, of course, need to be careful that I still get the nutrients in those less meals per day.
So on one hand, it seems to be a way to regulate your weight. What are other benefits? Like, is that the main reason to
Yeah.
intermittent fasting, or is there any other
Many
additional
many
benefits
processes.
to
So
that?
exactly, the calorie restriction and weight loss, which for many people is so beneficial as
Yeah.
such in itself.
Yeah.
The obesity is so widespread in the modern Western countries. I think we a while ago passed the time, the moment where more people on the planet die from excessive
My
food
God, is
intake
it?
than from starvation, from nutrient deprivation in
Yeah.
the poor
Yeah.
countries.
Wow.
The starvation problem, it shifted because many of the modern society diseases are indirectly related to overweight.
Yeah.
The whole metabolic diseases such as diabetes type 2, but also many of the heart diseases coming from the cholesterol and the overnutrition and the obesity, and related also to cancer and so on. More deaths are associated, related to the overeating. So
Yeah.
it's really a problem. So this in
Interesting.
itself is a
Yeah.
huge benefit, not just the obesity in itself, which whatever then causes joint problems because too much weight on the knees and stuff like this. But of course, obesity is directly correlated to higher incidence of diabetes, heart attack, cardiovascular diseases related
Right.
high blood pressure,
Right.
etc., and even cancer as well. So that in itself is huge, and it's pretty clear, like that obesity
Yeah.
is related to earlier mortality or decreased life expectancy is very clear. There's no doubt about that. Depending, of course, on the degree, how much overweight and so on. But apart from the calorie restriction, reducing weight, which in itself is huge. In addition, there's a lot of research and debate around what they call autophagy. Autophagy is a process which is, in a way, this starving on a cellular level. So, putting on a cellular level the organism into change from processing new input into a kind of starvation mode where it's not negative starvation. We usually think, oh, I'm starving, it's not good. No, it's a beneficial thing, as we discussed before, for the maintenance, for the body to get rid of toxins, purification, and just live on its reserves. It's believed and seen in first scientific evidence that it is a very beneficial thing. Autophagy can be not only introduced via reduced food nutrient intake, but also via strong physical activity, sports, intense stuff, via ice bath and other processes where we put the body into an extreme condition where this autophagy kicks in, and that is linked to increased longevity. So it's still a debated field, and there's lots of contradicting researches, but there's a lot of evidence pointing in these directions. So this is one of the principles underlying the intermittent fasting on a daily basis, but also the long-term fasting of several days, weeks, which, especially the longer it gets and the more medical preconditions there are, the more medical guidance it needs. And there's downsides, catches, problems, and debates around the negative side effects of it. So one needs to be knowledgeable, do it properly, etc. But not only in modern research, there's considerable evidence pointing in this direction, not only anecdotal personal experiences from people like us who tried these things and lived it for years and decades, but also it's a classical historical thing where this fasting topic, no, it's a, I mentioned in the Buddhist monasteries for 2,500 years they've been doing intermittent fasting. It's nothing new, and they've experienced the benefits, and for good reasons they've been practicing it and keeping it for more than 2 millennia. And in many other religious traditions, not just to be dogmatic and to be whatever conservative about something, the fasting, like for example in the Islamic Muslim tradition, we live here in Indonesia, in Bali, which is Indonesia is the biggest populated Muslim country with more than 200,000 millions, and we're just finishing Ramadan here. There's a whole thing going on with only eating when the sun is down, and that's been practiced also there for extended centuries and millennia. And then temporary fasting in Christianity for Easter and Christmas, this, that, special dietary choices, what to eat when, and so on. So the fasting topic is a long-term one. There's many also alternative healing approaches, not only over the last decades, but over the last centuries, where fasting has been recommended for healing, etc. So it's a long-standing human tradition. Benefits have been experienced. So giving it a try and then seeing what feels comfortable, easing in from restricting the food intake from 12 hours to 10 hours to 8 hours per day. That's a common regular one, which is kind of sustainable, to basically skip one meal, 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating. And that's not so difficult after all.
And I
8 hours,
have a
have a brunch, have a big brunch at 10ish, and then have even 3 meals. Big brunch, like a king, they say have a big brunch at that, whatever, 10 o'clock time, if it fits into your rhythm. Then have a like afternoon meal, snack, late lunch additionally, and then an early dinner at 6. And yeah, it requires some kind of the social thing, and then sometimes you have dinner with friends at 8, and it's okay. But getting into that such a daily rhythm can be already quite beneficial.
And very practical. What about I start eating at 10? What about my coffee? I stop eating at 6. What about my ginger water
Yeah,
or
no, doesn't
my.
affect. Like calorie free type of drinks don't affect the autophagy, it is believed. Of course, they have their own effects, and one will need to look what and so on. But the autophagy process, as far as my limited awareness of the topic goes, um,
So it is about the
but
digestive
exactly, and
process.
exactly, and people ask, then, yeah, but what about my milk in my coffee?
Exactly, my cappuccino.
My
Maybe I
cappuccino,
want a
exactly. And
cappuccino.
then, especially if you put the caramel syrup on top of it, then the autophagy, no. And a little bit of milk, probably you kind of like get away with it, and like 90x% of your autophagy stays. But the more creamy your milk cappuccino is, and the more caramel syrup you put on top of it, uh,
XXL Starbucks latte.
exactly, super large, super size me baby Starbucks type of tall or large, whatever they call it. No, the more the sugar, the more the calories in, the more it will stop. But a ginger
Right,
water at
right.
night, you'll be fine. Lemon, I have lemon water in the morning. It's fine. Like, it's basically water with some
So don't
lime.
put honey.
Don't put honey. Exactly. Good, yeah. So much as an intro to intermittent fasting from the Buddhist tradition 2,500 years plus ago to
Right,
modern
right.
scientific debated research. There's something to not eating too much all day long. And it might be, of course, that some people have more this kind of, for me, it's important to regularly have a snack. But then also question, is it just my habit and my body got used to it and my mind is kind of obsessed with it? Do I really need it? Give it a try. And also not just 2, 3 days, but give it a try to let the body adapt to something else. Experiment for a few weeks, not temporary, trying things out and being open minded about it, and then not getting too dogmatic. You mentioned that also, how these temporary cleanses, we can get too obsessed by it, and the danger. I remember we did some fasting some 25 years ago, like
Mm.
1 week 10-day fast and so on, just like one glass of diluted watery juice per day, or just water fasting, tea fasting, whatever. um, and then the famous saying there in the German fasting community goes, every fool, every idiot can do fasting. Just stop eating and be stubborn about it. Everybody can do that. But only the wise people
Yeah.
can break a fast smoothly, harmoniously. Because the tendency is, of course, like the counterbalancing and overreacting.
Yeah,
Go
the
on full
pendulum
starvation mode,
swinging
the
into the
pendulum
wrong
swinging from one
direction.
side to
Yeah.
the other. I stop eating and I don't allow myself anything, and then finally I cannot wait for the fast to break, and the whatever 10 hours, 12 hours, or 2 days or 10 days are over, and then I'm just kind of like overeating, binging. I remember a friend of us when he stopped his 1 week, 10-day fast. He went for some like massive doner kebab meat
Yeah.
sandwich, like two, like just immediately stopping the fast with two of these massive meat sandwiches. And he felt horrible afterwards, of course, because the system is not used to like suddenly. But this is the psychology, it's huge. They were going away from one extreme to the other, the
Yeah.
obsession.
Yeah.
This is on the one hand in the fasting, but generally in the dieting approaches. This yo-yo effect, this pendulum swinging from one extreme to the other, severe restriction, then severe overeating, binging, etc. So it's a very common, very well experienced human tendency to be aware and careful with. And the same holds true also of the cleanses. They call it the orthorexia, where people get obsessed with like only the most pure and perfect food, and everything else will be like poison for my body. If I just put 5 grains, I will poison my liver and my digestive system gets thrown over. There's also something in this more harmonious balance, not
Yeah.
to go into the extremes of the cleansing for too long periods. In our alternative communities, we've seen decades of
Yeah.
too much of this cleansing. So the golden middle path, as the Buddha called it, neither too much
Right.
nor too little. This is why the Buddha is actually not recommending extended fasts, but a good daily habit of this intermittent fasting the Buddha
Yeah.
recommended, because the Buddha was there. He came from the royal palace and definitely had the excess of the grapes, kind of Caesar style. And then he went into the extreme of the yogic lifestyle and starved
Aesthetic
almost,
lifestyle. Yeah.
like down to a few grains of rice per day is kind of the legend, like in the extreme. And then after his awakening, he saw the middle path, neither too much nor too little, neither too tight nor too
Right.
loose, and came up with this more harmonious, balanced approach that is also recommended in the Bhagavad Gita, the, in a way, the Bible of Hinduism, and in many other spiritual and philosophical traditions. We find this happy medium, this happy balance between the two
Yeah.
extremes as a
Yeah.
main recommendation.
In my experience, the more diet moves towards whole foods, towards a simplification of the food rather than my meal containing 20, 30 ingredients, rather it has 10 or something like that. Um, the less craving is there, the less craving in a way for the food that's really supportive is there. So I feel this simplification and this movement towards whole food, away from processed food, has a very natural settling towards what's actually supportive for what we are. That's where we started, right? Basically, everything that we eat becomes us. Like from our doner kebab sandwich to the apple, from a handful of nuts to a highly processed ice cream. Like that's us. That's us in a way.
Exactly, we are what we eat, because literally, no, we talked initially about this. Every 7 years, or after 7 years, all cells have been gradually, progressively replaced, because we are what we eat. Literally, you gave the banana example. These molecules, atoms of the banana, they are the building blocks that I'm using in my organism to replace the dying cells.
Right,
Literally,
right.
it's physically, tangibly very true, even though we cannot tangibly feel and see it and understand it, how it works. But it's literally the case. We
Yeah.
are literally made out of the ingredients, the atoms, molecules we put into our body. We underestimate.
Yeah, so basically, each time we eat, we are reinventing ourselves, basically. Um, and that comes along with quite a bit of awareness of what we put inside of ourselves. If this is something that really drops in, that lands, I feel naturally a more harmonious relationship with food develops.
Exactly. And you gave the keyword, the whole food
Yeah,
versus processed, and further down the spectrum, ultra processed. Kind of this
yeah.
factory food with these long ingredient lists of unpronounceable chemical molecule structures where we don't have a clue. Sometimes they get labeled in the European standard with E212, and
What is that?
what is it?
Like,
And yeah, maybe some of those ingredients are just kind of chemically accurate names for something basic, and it's not as toxic as it would sound in the funny Latin name or something. Not everything is as bad as it seems, and some of them are kind of benign, and there's no scientific evidence that it's really carcinogenic, causing cancer. But still, generally, the principle is the less, the better
yeah,
of these type of ultra processed, refined, and like if you see, even seeing, for example, I got tempted to get into protein powders. Because
mhm,
okay, protein intake is very important, and so on. We talk another conversation about that. Um, okay, but where to get the protein from? Okay, then whole food. Yeah, but then I got to eat a lot of eggs. I got to eat a lot of nuts. I got to eat a lot of this, and so on. Wow, it's quite a lot. So okay, then protein powder. But if you see how protein powder is processed, where it's coming from, I'm not so sure. And then I was looking even into whey protein, which is actually coming from some milk product
yeah.
and so on. And how that is processed, you just watch a video, the industrial, like, wow, like, I'm not sure if I want to eat that. So, and there is also, I saw, watched a few videos even of experts who used to be producers and proponents, like these fitness health
Yeah.
enthusiasts and
Yeah.
so on, who had their own protein companies and so on, who then in their older age they stopped it. It's kind of like, no, I preferred just the whole food stuff, just simple,
Yeah.
straightforward nutrients.
Yeah.
So there's something in this whole food versus processed, ultra processed food. But one needs to pay more attention then what to put inside of the body. Um, and in addition to this whole food versus processed, another keyword is the nutrient dense.
Yeah.
Because a plant-based diet, a vegan food intake can be also Coca-Cola, French fries, and Oreo. All of them are plant-based and are vegan in that way. But they are not whole food. They're
Yeah.
ultra processed, and they are not nutrient dense. They're just
Yeah.
empty calories, extracted, refined carbs, etc., which have so many problems and catches. So nutrient dense, and nuts and seeds and sprouts are among the nutrient dense foods. Then the pulses, legumes, super important and super rich for the protein. Then complementing the protein coming from the legumes, pulses, chickpeas, all the beans and all of those friends. Combining them with some grains for the complete protein, the all essential amino acids topic, and so on. One needs to be somewhat attentive to that topic, etc.
Mm.
And not just focusing in those less meals per day and less processed and more like less hollow. So whole food, nutrient dense, so not empty calories, but nutrient dense and unprocessed food. If one makes the right choices there and puts those nutrients in during a shorter duration of the day. And then it doesn't need to be 100% plant based. It's just even reducing the animal product intake already makes a significant
Right.
difference.
Right.
And there's so many studies which clearly show that. Just to reduce the amount of animal products in one's diet is definitely clearly shown to have health benefits if one comes from this kind of like 2.5 meals per day being more or less predominantly animal based. There definitely seems to be a lot of evidence which shows that to reduce the animal food intake has definitely benefits. So I think this we can say is uncontestable, even though some people also on a full carnivorous diet they get along, and there's other experiments, sure, there's also evidence for that. It's always contested, but not
What's
reducing.
important is, in case you're inspired to look a little bit into renewing yourself, reinventing yourself, resetting yourself through what you put into your body, and you decide for a certain dietary philosophy, we can almost say system. It's important to really stick to one system and not try to make your best match from Ayurveda with acid alkaline and the intermittent fasting, and maybe trying to put that together with, I don't know. The systems, they have a logic within and they work when following the logic, just finding what works. So also trying with different approaches, but mixing is usually really not recommended. But really sticking to one system and letting the benefits really flourish, basically, in the body is something that I find important
Definitely,
to mention
yeah,
here.
because the body adapts to it. Also, the whole
Yeah,
metabolic digestive processes, and also the psychology.
yeah,
Um,
right.
it's very easy to get first confused and then frustrated about contradicting
Yeah,
dietary recommendations.
and
And there's
then
scientific
to
studies for this and scientific for studies for that, and then they cannot even agree, and it doesn't even make sense. This healthy diet and that healthy diet, and I tried this for one day and I tried that for 3 days, and it made me feel horrible. And now I just continue with my standard processed food. I eat what I want when I want. Leave me alone. You guys cannot even agree.
uh,
So people give up on it also. So there's something in also not overthinking it and over researching it, because then again it's the obsessiveness coming in and the
uh,
worries and stories and the
uh,
confusion and frustration. and then making unsustainable choices like diets, and then, as we discussed, the pendulum swings from the dieting, fasting in the other extreme of overeating, binging, and trying this extreme and that extreme diet, and that's definitely also neither beneficial for the body nor for the psychology.
But does it impact us what we eat? Yes,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
is what we are.
There's no doubt. Exactly.
So find what works. Also, that might change with age, that might change with season, that
Yes.
might change with changing conditions. So also here, being a little flexible and just observant of what is supportive, and rather being led by how you feel than what you're supposed to think about the diet.
Exactly. Yeah. Also, matching the lifestyle, life circumstances, the season, whatever, in the winter, when being pregnant, when being not pregnant, and being an athlete. No, it's very different
Yeah.
food choices needed if one leads a sedentary lifestyle versus is a very physically active
Yeah.
person. So
Yeah.
many reasons
Yeah.
why the diet needs to be adapted and matched, and it's
Right.
the diet is in a way one part of various ingredients.
Yeah.
So, wonderful overview of the topic of renew and the topic of regeneration, revitalization, and maybe even with the right dietary choices, rejuvenation, giving the body a break so it can process all the input, do some maintenance, some purification, and then longevity might be a benefit of all these attempts to live a more harmonious life of neither too much nor too little, nutrient dense whole foods which nourish not only the body but also the mind. Many stories about the gut microbiome influencing the psychology, the emotions, and so many other topics we will explore in future episodes to follow.
This was Wisdom in Motion with the Akasha Yoga family. Keep on shining in the spirit of yoga.